International team members, fellow students, and distinguished guests. My name is Reda Shahir. I'm a graduate student at this department, and I'd like to wish you all good morning and welcome to the 6th Annual Student Conference of Linguistics at Orakçı University. Formerly known as the Student Conference of Theoretical and Experimental Linguistics, we started out with the idea of featuring work from graduate and undergraduate students in linguistics from all over the world, and we had a slight name change to represent our broader scope in 2022, and now we're known as Student Conference on Linguistics. This year we are proud to feature, we're proud to say that we received 65 submissions from 16 countries, and we're proud to feature 32 of those. So 12 of those will be in form of talks and 20 as posters. We also will have invited talks from two most distinguished academics, Dr. Junko Kanero from Metehan University Department of Psychology today, and tomorrow Dr. Markus Böttger from the Department of Linguistics at the University of Vienna. I would like to thank our esteemed faculty members, especially Dr. Demirel, for their invaluable support for this process, and as well as my fellow organization team members for everything, and for you all for being here. So without further ado, let's start our very first session of the day. I yield the floor to Aslı Kuzgun, who will be chairing the session.
Hi everyone, welcome to our conference. I hope everyone would have their morning coffee because we will start with syntax session. Our first presenter is Metehan Eryılmaz from Boğaziçi University. I will now hand the floor to him to give his talk titled How Turkish Structural Cases Behave in Causative Constructions, a Dependent Case Theoretic Analysis. So let's welcome him.
Thank you, Aslı. So today I will be presenting my work titled How Turkish Structural Cases Behave in Causative Constructions, a Dependent Case Theoretic Analysis. In the past literature, dependent case assignment rules was proposed, and those rules are able to capture most of the sentences in Turkish for the case assignment. But when there are more than 3 argumental MPs in a sentence, they alone are not enough to explain this case assignment. This is observed best in causative structures, which are formed of light verbs. In one, we see that we would expect both Ayşe and Doktor to be marked with either accusative or dative cases. However, we observe that while Doktor has a dative case, Ayşe is marked with accusative. Similarly, in 2, we would expect both of them to be marked with a dative case. However, again, we see that Ali is marked with dative case while Ömer is accusative. So it looks like as if there is a restriction in Turkish, like a ban that stops us from marking MPs, stops us from double marking of cases on MPs basically. So I will show that these cases we observe on such sentences are indeed structural, and the reason why we observe such a puzzling data is really about the domains where this case assignment takes place. So the plan is the following. I will first give a brief background information on the dependent case theory, then we'll show you how these structural cases, why these cases are structural, then how this case assignment is handled, and then we will have a look at how these dependent case assignment rules explain light verbs constructions. Then we will move to the causatives where we observe this puzzling data, and then I will show you my proposal as to how we can explain this, the ban on this double marking of cases. So the idea that this case might be the morphological reflex of the relationship between 2 MPs basically started with the Maran's proposal of case realization disjunctive hierarchy, which suggests that the case is assigned in this following hierarchy. We first assign the lexical case, then move to the dependent case, and which are assigned with the configurational rules. And then we have unmarked case like nominative in Turkish, and then if an MP is left without a case, the default case is assigned. So after that CRDH, Baker and Vinokurova used the following rules to explain the case assignment in the Turkic language Saha, which I will use slightly modified versions to explain the case assignment in Turkish as well. So now let's move to the Turkish structural cases. So accusative in Turkish is one of those structural cases because its existence basically depends on the structure. When we have a transitive, when we have a sentence with a transitive verb, we observe accusative case on the object. However, when we passivize that sentence, the accusative is lost. So Can kitabı okudu, kitap is marked with accusative. However, we passivize that sentence, kitap okundu, accusative is lost. Dative, on the other hand, can function both as a inherent/lexical case and as a structural case. And there are various environments, according to Göksel and Kerslake, where we can observe dative. And among these environments, the most structural behaving one is the causes of causative structures based on transitive verbs. So with the causatives of intransitives, cause MPs are marked with accusative case. Serdar Ege'yi koşturdu and not Ege'ye koşturdu. However, when we causativize a transitive verb, this time we observe dative on the cause MP. That is, depending on the valency of the causativized verb, the case on the MP changes. So when we add another MP to the structure, the case changes from accusative to dative. So how does this case assignment works? I will slightly modify the dependent dative assignment case by Baker and Vinokurova and use the following rule. So the rule basically says that when there are two MPs in a VP such that MP1 complements MP2, then MP1 is assigned dative unless MP2 already has a case. So by VP, I mean that all the verbal projections up to the voice head. And for the accusative, I use the same rule as Baker and Vinokurova. When there are two distinct MPs in the same phase, such that MP1 complements MP2, value the case of MP1 as accusative unless MP1 already has a case. So let's have a look at accusative again and see how this works. So in the sentence Can kitabı okudu, Can kitap moves to the specifier of VP for the specific reason. Then they end up with Can in the same phase. This triggers a case competition, and kitap is assigned accusative case by the rule. And if kitap were to be non-specific, it would stay inside the VP, they would be in different phases, and it would end up with the unmarked non-letter case. With datives, we see that in the sentence 14, Serdar Ege'ye maraton koşturdu. Ege is assigned dative case, and how does this work? I follow Hari's proposal that Turkish is a VP splitting language, and this causative head is placed between the verb VP and the voice P. So Ege is in the specified position of the cause P, and since Ege and maraton are still in the same VP, the dative assignment rule is triggered by the case competition, and Ege gets dative case. And since maraton is not on the specifier of VP, it does not get accusative, it ends up with the unmarked nominative. So these rules work like this. So let's have a look at how they work on light verb constructions. In the following sentences, the indirect objects bear different cases. For example, in 16a, Furkan Ömer'e küfür etti, Furkan cursed at Ömer, we observe dative on Ömer. However, in 16b, Dr. Ayşe'yi muayene etti, this time we observe accusative. So Kabak and Demirel claim that nominal plus et constructions in Turkish do not behave uniformly because the nominals in them are not uniform, basically. They claim that in the first sentence, Furkan Ömer'e küfür etti, küfür is an argumental MP by itself, and this means that it can get into the case calculus. So when we add Ömer to the structure, merge it to the structure, this triggers a case competition, Ömer gets dative, and this explains the case assignment in this sentence. However, in the second sentence, muayene is a root by itself, so it does not get into the case competition. We move Ayşe to the specifier of PP, Doctor and Ayşe end up in the same page, so this triggers the accusative assignment rule, and Ayşe gets accusative. So, given these rules and this data, let's have a look at how these work in causatives, basically. So far, the proposed rules, dependent case assignment rules, are able to account for all these sentences. However, when we add another MP into the structure by causativization, the picture gets a little complicated. Especially, as I mentioned, when we causative a light verb structure and increase the number of argumental MPs, we end up with this structure where we cannot have both MPs marked as dative or accusative. So in 19, we see that the light-verb construction where nominal is the root by itself is causativized. Umut doktora Ayşe'yi muayene ettirdi. This structure is quite similar to the structure of a Dilay transitive in that our dependent case rules should be able to explain this, and they can actually. So when we move Ayşe to the VP specifier of the VP, Doctor and Ayşe end up with the same VP, so the dative assignment rule applies. Doctor gets dative case, and then we add Umut to the structure, and since Umut is able to see the specifier of VP, accusative is triggered. Ayşe gets accusative case. However, when we causativize the light-verb construction where we have an argumental nominal in the predicate, and this interesting problem surfaces, Furkan Ömer'i Ali'ye küfür ettirdi. Furkan made Ömer curse at Ali. So, in 22, we observe that both Ömer and Ali are still inside the VP. However, when we go by bottom-up derivation, we add Ali to the structure, this triggers a case competition, Ali gets dative, we go on with the derivation, we add Ömer to the structure, they are still in the same VP, so we would expect Ali, Ömer, to be marked with dative as well, because this is the domain where we assign the dative case. However, instead, we observe an accusative case of Ömer. So how can we explain this? Instead of a nominative, dative, nominative order, on the MPs, we have nominative, accusative, dative, and nominative order, basically. So my proposal is that this puzzling case assignment can be explained, can be accounted for without changing the dependent case assignment rules. Instead, what we need to do is to redefine the domains where these rules apply. By doing so, it will be possible to explain how the higher VP inside the VP gets accusative instead of the dative case. Then there are four MPs in the sentence. So I have two main claims. One of them is that spell out happens cyclically in the sense of MB 2010, and second, in addition to the VP, root phrase is also a phase. So briefly, it's suggested in MB 2010 that although the complement of a phase head is spelled out after that phase ends, that spelled out material is still visible to the higher structure up until a new phase head is merged to the structure. So how this will help us? Let's have a look at the same structure again. When we merge küfür and root, that root phrase is sent to spell out, but it is still visible to the higher up material until we add a new phase type, which is the cause head. So we add Ali into the structure, and this triggers a case competition again. Ali gets dative case. However, this time when we add cause into the structure, the root phrase is sent to the PF, so it becomes invisible to the higher structure. Then we add Ömer, and there is no case competition between Ömer and Ali because Ali already has a case. Then we add Furkan. This time, accusative assignment rule is triggered, and Ömer gets an accusative case by that rule. And this explains how we observe nominative, accusative data, and nominative order. And this also is able to explain the other light-verb structure. So we move Ayşe to the specifier of the VP, and when we add close to the structure, the root phrase is sent to PF, but it doesn't matter this time because Ayşe is already out of the root phrase. So when the doctor is added to the structure, Ayşe, doctor gets a dative case, and then we add Umut into the structure, and Ayşe gets accusative case. So, summing up, the dependent case assignment in Turkish poses an interesting puzzle when we have more than 3 MPs in the structure, and dependent case assignment rules by themselves are not quite enough to explain this data. So, as an attempt to solve this puzzle, I claim that root phrase is a phase, and spell out happens cyclically, whereas spell out domain is still visible to the structure until a new phase that is merged. In a sense, this allows me to like slightly change the domains where the rules apply and thus explain the data. Thank you very much for.
We have some time for questions.
Question back there.
Please.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think in some locations, when you say, for example, to couple area, where the person may change.
Does it? Because when you move Ali in front of the Ömer, the swearing action is still carried out by Ömer. When you say Furkan Ali'ye Ömer'i küfretti, the one who swears is still Ömer. Like the Kozi MP is still Ömer. It's just a scrambling effect, basically. You move Ali in front of Ömer. Was it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Sometimes, for example,
Furkan Ali, yeah. But this time you don't have an additional MP to trigger like the accusative assignment. You simply add Ali into the structure. This triggers like another case competition. Ali gets dative, and then you add like the subject into the structure. And since like the trigger is already sent to the PF, it does not get any case. Yes.
Any other
Thank you.
questions? Yes.
Thanks, Metehan. Super cool. Really.
Thank you.
Very good. Just first, it's very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Very native speakers are to follow the data. But about the doctor and wine and where doctor is, who is the Kozi there?
Doctor. Doctor.
Is he? Because it seems like when you go and wine, well, doctor still gets the data. Doctor and wine. So what about the base structure is one? And in fact, one doesn't have the causative, and then you have a suppletive X. So essentially, you're not necessarily starting with Dr. Muayene etti, but you're starting with Ayşe Dr. Muayene oldu.
Yeah.
Then the Kozi is in fact the Ayşe, not necessarily the doctor, because there's no direct link between the doctor and doctor. We don't really push something on the doctor. We
Yes.
push something on the Ayşe. That would solve the problem much easier because that doctor could be just taking a PP or less assigned case.
Yes, yes.
Those become a problem.
I see. Well, I haven't looked at the structures, like the library structures, except for it for now, and I don't know how it works with all structures. Maybe they have a different structure. I don't know. But yeah, right.
That's very nice.
Yeah, thank you.
This is not really a question, but a follow-up. Grade K has a dissertation on Turkish causative.
Yeah.
And he analyzes the dative doctora in such construction as an adjunct. So then it might not compute for.
Yeah, so it's inherent.
If you like, you can take a look at his dissertation and see. I don't know whether his argumentation is sound enough to qualify it as adjuncts, but
Yeah,
there's this work out there. So it's better to.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I have time for a few more questions. No? Okay. I have one question.
Yeah,
but-
sure.
Oh, okay.
Hi, thank you. That was a very nice talk, right?
Thank you.
I'm not a Turkish native speaker, I'm a phonologist, so I have a very basic and stupid question probably. That's fine. The question is, so assuming the structures work as you put them up, we now know there is a certain order we follow, like where dative gets assigned, where accusative gets assigned. Is there a deeper reason for the cases being assigned in the places? I mean, I understand you have a machine which says if conditions so and so is triggered, assign dative. If machine so and so is triggered, assign accusative. Is there a reason why one over the other is? So I'm thinking in particular, there are these accounts out there where they say, well, accusative, dative, they stand in a certain relationship to each other. One of them is more complex than the other. Does that in any way link to the structures you have in place? I was wondering.
I think since we have two rules, and one of them is more specific, it tells you to assign data case if and only if it's in the VP, it's chosen list first. Check if this domain is VP, and then data is assigned to that. If the two MPs are inside that VP, and if not, if they are not in VP, both of them, then the other rule is chosen and accusative is assigned. In the Baker and Vinokrovas work as well, they choose a dative as the more specific case from the domain to assign VP, and accusative is more like the elsewhere rule, basically. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks, I think you assumed that with küfür etmek. So with that word, the dative is structural case, so dependent dative.
Yes.
Would anything change if it was a lexical case? Because that kind of feels like more appropriate for the MP.
I guess we would still need to account for why küfür does not get an accusative case, and if we follow the idea that it still gets an accusative but it's a non-morpheme, maybe that would account for it. This time, if Ali were to take an inherent case, it wouldn't get into the case competition. We would move to the Amer, but this time again we would not be able to explain why Amer doesn't get a data case, because they're still inside the data assignment domain. So we will still need to say that küfür is no longer visible to Amer, and therefore Amer doesn't get a data case.
Any other guess?
Hi, thank you very much for the nice presentation. So I'm not Turkish speaker nor linguist, so I'm asking really stupid questions. So I mean, I just wanted to ask that if you consider a similar case in other languages, partially because my native language is Japanese, and if you haven't done so, I was just wondering if you assume your proposal to work on these supposed similar languages.
So I have checked this work by Baker and Vinokova. They analyzed the Saha, another Turkic language, and they have some interesting data which are quite different than how Turkish works. So I think these rules are kind of parameterized. I don't know. They are specific to the language and how they work. They still have the same as a dependent data assignment case rule and dependent accusative assignment rule, but they work differently, I guess. Where they observe an accusative case, for example, we don't see an accusative case in Turkish. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that's now time for Metehan. If you have more questions, you can ask them in the break time. Thank you, Metehan.
Thank you.
Our second presenter is Elif Orakçı from Middle East Technical University. We will hear her talk titled Exploring the Relation Between Gesture Presentation Perspective and Children's Spatial Performance. Let's welcome her. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Elif and it's really nice to be here. Actually, I'm a psychologist. I'm doing my master's on developmental psychology at Metehan. And today I will talk about my master project. It's named Exploring the Relation between Gesture Presentation Perspective and Children's Spatial Performances. And we conducted the study with my advisor, Dilay, Karadöller. Oops. Okay. To start with, as we all know, for children, sustaining independence and gaining awareness of their environment, one of the vital achievements for continue their growth. And the key factor of those achievements is actually the development of spatial understanding and navigation abilities. And when we examine spatial abilities, we see that they are highly related to both verbal and non-verbal language, such as gestures. And to understand better, we can give some examples from the literature. And when we look at the relation between language and spatial abilities, we see that in the literature, language enhances children's spatial navigation performances on visual spatial tasks. And language estimate also children's current and further spatial reasoning abilities, which actually shows us how important language have an important factor for spatial development. And we also see some similar results related to nonverbal language. When we present some tasks to children with gestures, it enhances actually children's verbal recall and road navigation performances, especially again in visual spatial tasks. And surprisingly, children benefit more from gestures on spatial tasks compared to adults, which actually shows how important gestures for children to understand better the spatial tasks. And when we elaborate gestures, we see that gestures, their gesture comprehension and production are based on some internal and external factors. And for internal factors, we can mention spatial abilities, and for external sources, we can consider content and context-based factors, and as well as audience and speaker-oriented effects. And here in the study, we focused on some specific internal sources, which are perspective taking, mental rotation, and relational reasoning. In the literature, we see that perspective taking abilities are highly related to actually the presentation perspective of gestures can affect social interactions. And for mental rotation, mental rotation tasks presented gestures, it enhances both adults and children's problem-solving abilities. And relational reasoning abilities also affects the quantity for or interconnectedness of gestures. So we wanted to include those. And for external sources, we consider an online educational presentation style. And we wanted to manipulate speakers' gesture use and its perspective. When we observe the speakers' use of gestures and their speech, we see that speakers can use their speech sometimes. They do not use any gestures. They sometimes use both their speech and gestures. And sometimes, especially in online educational presentation things, we see that speakers both use their speech and gesture, but their gestures are seen from an upper back angle. So we wanted to include those as an external factor. And considering all those things in the literature, we see that the interaction between internal and external sources of gesture comprehension while evaluating children's spatial reasoning abilities has not been investigated before. Also, the speaker's gesture presentation perspective, considering an upper back view, has not also been investigated. And lastly, no study so far explored the issue on visual spatial maps with presenting them on a screen. So we aim to investigate how internal and external sources relate to children's performance on visual spatial maps by varying speaker presentation conditions and gesture use. And we had 2 research questions, which are: does the perspective of multimodal inputs relate differently to children's spatial performance by varying perspective of gestures on visual spatial maps? And lastly, do children's internal source modulate their performance concerning the speaker's conditions? And to evaluate all this, in our method, we include 52 children, preschool children that age between 5 to 6. And we conducted some home visits and visited some kindergartens. And we designed a directions task. This task includes 9 maps. Those maps presented on a tablet screen. And maps include some landmarks, which are house, school, swimming pool. You can see some examples from here, maps. And we present, for each map, we designed road descriptions. Those road descriptions include some target first, based on some information types, which are action, spatial, and location. And we presented those maps with speaker videos. Speakers describe the road, and they describe the road in 3 conditions. In first condition, the top one is speech on the front-facing condition. A speaker describes the road only with her speech. And in the second condition, the speaker describes the road both her speech and gesture. And in the last condition, speaker describes the road both her speech and gesture, but her hands presented from an upper back angle. And after presenting those videos, we asked children to verbally recall the road, and we asked them to draw the road on a printed version of the map with a marker. And for our other spatial tasks, we use ghost time for assessing their mental rotation abilities. We use PTTC for perspective taking abilities, and we use RMTS for relational reasoning abilities. And to evaluate our results, it's not visible. To evaluate our results, we use linear mixed effect models, and we include speaker presentation types, relational reasoning abilities, mental rotation, and perspective taking as fixed factors. We include 2 comparison levels in mixed effect model. In our first model, in our first comparison, we compare the perspectives. We compare speech gesture front-facing condition and speech gesture upper back condition. And in our second comparison, we compare both speech gesture combination conditions with the speech-only condition. And we conducted 4 models based on the recall type. It's sadly not visible here. We conducted 4 models based on recall type. The first one was verbal spatial recall. The second one was location information recall. The third one was action information recall. And the last one was just assessing their drawing, considering their behavioral recall performances. So I'm going to present the results. For children's spatial verbal recall, we found that as children's perspective-taking abilities increase, their spatial information recall is also increased in speed gesture front-facing condition compared to speed gesture upper back condition. That means when they see spatial information, see and listen to spatial information from a front-facing view with the gestures, and if their perspective taking abilities is good enough, they really benefit from, they recall more information about spatial things compared to seeing them from an upper back angle. And for our location recall, we found that as children's perspective taking and relational reasoning abilities increase, their recall of location information is also increased in multimodal conditions, regardless of their perspective, compared to the speech-only condition. And for action recall, we found that as children's perspective taking and relational reasoning abilities increase, their action information recall is also enhanced. I'm sorry, as children's relational reasoning abilities increase, their action information recall is also enhanced in upper back condition, and regardless of their perspective taking abilities compared to the seeing them front-facing view. That means we see some difference between the recall types here. And we have another significant result for action model. We see that as children's perspective taking and mental rotation abilities increase, their action information recall also enhanced in multimodal conditions, regardless of the perspective, and compared to the speech-only condition. And lastly, for our drawing, for children's drawing responses, we found we didn't find any significant results. And to conclude all these complicated results, we can say that the relation between internal and external sources modulates children's verbal, but not necessarily behavioral recall performance. And also, children benefit more from multimodal conditions, regardless of the information types, since we see some similar results between the recall models. And higher perspective taking abilities modulates this. In all models, we see the interaction between perspective taking and children's recall performances. And for specific recall types, we see that mental rotation abilities are actually related to action information recall. That's we see in the literature also. And also the relational reasoning abilities is mostly related to location information recall. And we can say that when children also see the visual spatial maps on a screen, on a tablet screen, they can also benefit from the gesture presentations. And lastly, we can say that the study underlines the importance of children's spatial abilities with presentation perspective and multimodal input to enhance their spatial performances. For our implications, we can say that it was the first study using visual spatial maps that are presented on a screen. And it was the first one actually manipulated gesture presentation perspective from an upper back angle. And lastly, we can say that our results not only contribute to psycholinguistic studies, but can also have some further suggestions for online educational implications. And that was all. That's my advisor, Dilay Karadöller, and those were the assistants that helped us throughout this process. And thank you for your attention and listening. If you have any questions.
Thank you, Dilay. We have time for questions. Yes.
Sorry, just a curiosity question. Could you go back to your last graph?
Okay.
Do I need this?
All right, I'll go. All right, so let me remember my question here.
It's not that really visible, but
Can you walk me through it?
okay. In here we
And specifically, what are those mental rotation -1 and 1? So that's understandable.
actually the minus those are the significant results was the interaction between perspective taking, mental rotation, and our level 2 condition. Level 2 condition basically compares the multimodal conditions with speech only, and we found an interaction effect of mental rotation and perspective taking. Actually, that was what art gave us for reps.
That is, I assume, like one standard deviation around those.
Yes.
But it looks like in both cases they're going down a little bit.
Actually, as perspective taking abilities increase, the green one, we should follow the green one, and it's slightly increase, I'm sorry, in speech gesture conditions, but we do not observe that increase the green ones, especially in the speech only condition. It decreases.
So the effect is significant, but the slope is very small, I think.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? This is a complicated one, yes.
Can you
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. What I want to ask is, when we see the relational reasoning is high, the perspective taking is, looks maybe not very significant, but it looks like it has a negative impact on verbal action recall.
Yes, in the speech gesture front-facing condition, and I said that there is a relation between perspective taking and relational reasoning, especially for seeing the upper back, and regardless of their perspective taking performance, because the lines are really parallel to each other, regardless of the children's perspective taking abilities, as relational reasoning abilities increase, action recall performance also increase.
But when we only see the high relational reasoning children, the perspective taking, it's negative, right?
I'm not sure about it. Maybe not a negative effect, but we actually compare these two conditions. The comparison of those two conditions are significant with the interaction of relational reasoning and perspective taking. It is a little bit complicated to discuss those three-way interactions, but I hope I'm more clear.
And there is also another graph related to this, right?
Yes.
Without nothing. Speech only. Yes. For example, in speech only, we see a little bit of rise in medium, actually a rise in medium relational reasoning children when perspective taking is increasing, but we don't see in the other two graphs.
Yeah.
So, when their relational reasoning is higher, they become confused when you gesture.
Not gesture specifically, but the recall type is important, I think, because we presented gestures with some road descriptions, and in those road descriptions, the speaker says something, let's say, Ayşe went to school and he passed in front of his house, her house, and we considered, while evaluating these results, the action, location, and spatial information. Let's say in front of as a spatial information, and walking as an action information, and house and school as a location information. We see a difference basically from the recall types. We see a important effect of relational reasoning for location information, but we did not observe that much effect for action information. We observed the effect of mental rotation abilities for action. It is really complicated, but I hope I'm clear. It is related to more information type, not the gesture type, actually.
I think the discussion is important.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a short time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the discussion is really
Thank you.
I have still time for one more question.
Has nothing to do with the content. I'm not even sure if anything else. But just in the visual prompt, visual stimuli, the faces were not there. Is it that or?
Yes, the faces were not there because since we wanted to show the hands only, and if we present the faces, in this condition we would manipulate two things.
Yeah.
We would also want to present the face and change perspective. We just want to observe the change, the effect of perspective change. So we did not include faces. Thank you.
Okay, I can do. I guess a follow-up to your question, did you envisage how the results could be if the face were included for the front-facing gesture condition?
Actually, if the faces, in the literature, children are actually benefit from gesture use, whether there is face or not. Even the speaker's speech is disrupted, they are actually benefit from gesture use. I can maybe we can talk later, and I can maybe suggest some articles to you related to this, but maybe it won't affect the results, but we, in the literature, we observe the gestures effect without the faces or the sound, disrupted sound. So the effect, I'm not sure the effect would be that much considerable or not.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Now we have our last presenter, Nagihan Lüle from Boğaziçi University. We will hear her talk titled Verb Stranding BP Ellipsis in Turkish.
Hi everyone. Thank you all for coming. Today I will be talking about verbs and VP ellipsis. So this is a plan for the talk. Sorry, I forgot to use this. Yes. So this is the plan for the talk today. First, I will introduce argument ellipsis and verbs and VP ellipsis concepts, and then we're going to argue that these two different concepts proposed in the literature can occur in object gap constructions. Then I will briefly show the two concepts competing for object gap. After that, I will introduce an analysis sketch. Then hopefully we will conclude. Hopefully. Okay. First, what is argument ellipsis and what is verbs and VP ellipsis? Argument ellipsis and verbs and VP ellipsis are concepts which compete for similar kind of constructions, which are object gap constructions. While argument ellipsis is the deletion of a single internal argument, verbs and VP ellipsis is based on the concept that concept of dropping of an entire verb phrase except for the V head, Before elimination, we had moved out of the ellipsis side to a higher position, possibly to a T head or auxiliary head. So these are the examples from Turkish. On left, you can see argument example for in Turkish. Nazlı kitabı okudu ama Arcan okumadı. Here, the internal argument, a single argument, is dropped. Kitabı is an individual, and this is an example for argument ellipsis. On right, you can see verb sending ellipsis example from Turkish. Nazlı keki tarife göre pişirdi. Yasemin pişirmedi. Here, we cannot get we can get the adjunct including reading. This means that verb sending ellipsis exists because in argument ellipsis structures, adjunct including reading is not possible. Okay. Then I move on to null arguments in Turkish. In order to move on to null arguments in Turkish, we have to examine some of the generalizations and proposals suggested in the literature. First, Oku's generalization. According to Oku, argument ellipsis has been linked to word scrambling capacity of the language. Given Oku, the fact that Turkish is a word scrambling language, the object of, in Turkish can be a case of argument ellipsis. Following Oku, Şener and Takahashi followed Oku's generalization and his observation on the interpretation of object ellipsis, which suggests that adjunct including the impossibility of adjunct including reading appears in argument ellipsis structures, and Turkish is a word scrambling language. Şener and Takahashi tested adjunct including reading test on Turkish with this example. Can sorunları hızla çözdü, Filiz de çözmedi. They suggested that they only get Filiz did not solve the problem, and not Filiz did not solve the problem quickly, so they don't get the adjunct including reading. Therefore, they claim that Turkish allows argument ellipsis structures, but not verb sending ellipsis. However, in Turkish, Filiz did not solve the problem quickly. Interpretation is available. Therefore, this contradicts Oku's and Şener Takahashi's observations on Turkish on argument ellipsis. Furthermore, lastly, Landau's generalizations on verb sending ellipsis and argument ellipsis. Landau proposes the idea of semantic type restrictions on object gaps. He analyzes structures in Hebrew where object gap occurs, and he observes a common characteristic of the elided items, which is being individuals. Therefore, he explains the ungrammaticality of certain object gap structures with the semantic type restriction. So, using this, he claims that verb stranding VP ellipsis does not exist, since the domain of existence of argument ellipsis actually is a superset of verb stranding VP ellipsis, and in the domains where argument ellipsis is impossible, verb stranding VP ellipsis is not possible. So those structures are ungrammatical in Hebrew. He suggests that there is no concept as verb stranding VP ellipsis, and argument ellipsis can explain all. But this is not the case in Turkish. The claim in this talk is that Turkish has verb stranding VP ellipsis. In fact, object gap can be reduced to only instances of verb stranding VP ellipsis in Turkish, which is different from what Landau suggests for Hebrew. Now, I will provide an analysis sketch by testing the existence of verb stranding VP ellipsis in Turkish. In the literature, various tests have been proposed to distinguish between argument ellipsis and verb synonym ellipsis, or to demonstrate the non-existence of verb synonym ellipsis. So we will test these on, I've tested these on Turkish examples. First, Ecem test. So this test is followed from Oku and Park's generalizations. As mentioned before, Ecem including reading is not available in argument ellipsis instances, according to their generalization. Şener and Takahashi tested this on Turkish, and they also claim that Turkish does not exhibit verb synonym ellipsis because Ecem including reading is impossible in Turkish. However, we have seen that I've shown you that Ecem including reading is actually possible in Turkish. Moreover, this is another example of availability of Ecem including reading. Nazlı keki tarife göre pişirdi. Nazlı baked the cake according to the recipe. Yasemin pişirmedi. Kek kabarmadı. Yasemin did not bake the cake according to the recipe. It did not rise. The grammaticality of sentence 7 after 6 explains that there is a cake, and it means that Ecem including reading is possible in these structures in Turkish. Therefore, this can be an evidence for the existence of verb synonym ellipsis in Turkish, or the argument ellipsis definition might be different and across linguistically. Furthermore, while supporting his idea of verb synonym ellipsis, not having any environment where argument ellipsis is impossible, Landau suggests some impossible environments for argument ellipsis. These are argument adverbs, predicate, nominal case, naming verbs, argumental measure phrases, and chunks of non-decomposable idioms. So to be able to test whether Turkish behaves differently or similarly to Hebrew in this manner, I have tested these tests on Turkish and received the following results. Oh, sorry. Okay, first one, argumental adverbs in Turkish. In Hebrew, in constructions where there exists an argumental adverb, argument ellipsis is restricted. Landau supports the non-availability of argument ellipsis in these structures with the semantic type restriction, so that the elided item is not an individual here. Argumental adverbs do not denote individuals. However, in Turkish, we have such constructions that allow object gap. First, E is an argumental modifier since Nazlı davranmadı is ungrammatical in Turkish. Therefore, Nazlı çocuklara iyi davrandı ama ablası davranmadı is a perfectly fine example. So here, E, the argumental adverb is dropped, and this is available in Turkish, and E it does not denote an individual. Therefore, this is against the Landau's claims on semantic restrictions and object gap. Also, this shows that Turkish behaves differently in such constructions from Hebrew. Second test proposed by Landau, predicate nominal case. Predicate nominals are another impossible environment for argument ellipsis in Hebrew. Again, he associates this situation, the impossibility of object drop, to the semantic type restriction of the elided item. In these structures, predicate nominals do not denote individuals, they denote predicates. So, therefore, the elided item is not an individual. Therefore, he claims that in Hebrew, according to the semantic type restrictions, these structures are not allowed. In Turkish, however, again, such examples are available where object gap is not restricted. This is again against the generalization suggested by Landau. Batı'da siterini despot görüyorlar ama Putin'i görmüyorlar. In West, they see Stalin as despot, but they don't see Putin as despot. Despot here is a predicate, not an individual, and this is again a perfectly fine sentence in Turkish. Third one, naming verbs. Given Landau's generalization, which states that when the elided item is not an individual, argument absence is restricted. In naming verbs, the name arguments of the naming verbs do not denote an individual. They again denote predicates. So these structures are not available in Hebrew. However, again, in Turkish, such examples exist. Ablan seni kıskandı, sen doktor oldun, sonra o da oldu. Your sister was jealous of you, you became a doctor, then she became a doctor too. Doctor in the last part of the sentence is dropped. Doctor does not denote an individual, it's a predicate here. It can be dropped, which is again different from the structures in Hebrew. This suggests that argumentative structures are maybe different in Turkish, or this is a case of verb synonym absence in Turkish. Next one, argumental measure phrases. The argumental measure phrases present another set of examples for impossible environments. Sorry, I don't think this works. Okay. Okay, yes, thank you. Another set of impossible environments for argumental abscess. Because measure phrases do not denote individuals, they cannot escape the ellipsis sign. And this is supported in Hebrew and explained by Landau. However, in Turkish, 12 and 13 are okay. İlk film 2 saat sürdü mü? The first movie lasts 2 hours. Hayır sürmedi. No, it didn't. So the argument measure phrase is dropped here. It does not denote an individual again. And this is, again, a perfectly fine construction. This shows that Hebrew and Turkish is, again, different. This can be an example of verb synonym absence in Turkish. The last impossible environment of argument absence suggested by Landau. Chunks of non-decomposable idioms. The non-decomposable idioms are not denotational. Therefore, argument absence is restricted in such environments in Hebrew. However, in Turkish, in such environments, object gap occurs. Here, the elided item is considered to be an individual since snake, in this example, kasap bayramı avladı ama market avlamadı. The butcher shop had no customers during the holiday, but the market had customers during the holiday. The elided item is snake. And it does not, it refers to an individual since this is these refer to kinds. Therefore, this elided item is an individual, which is different from the other possible environments. However, these environments, chunks of non-decomposable idioms are suggested that impossible environments for argument abscess. Here, we can see that argument abscess is not restricted, since the semantic type of the elided item is an individual. This shows that Turkish behaves different from Hebrew in this specific constructions. Maybe this is not a case of verb synonym ellipsis in Turkish, but this is another environment where argument abscess is possible in Turkish. The last test, the conjunction test. 16 is grammatical. Let's see the example. Nazlı kalemi masaya ve kitabı rafa koydu. Yasemin ise koymadı. Here, 16 is grammatical. And it gives the interpretation that Yasemin did not put the pencil on the desk and the book on the shelf. After 15, Nazlı put the pencil on the desk and the book on the shelf. The elided item is not a simple internal argument, but it's a complex item. And the illusion of this complex item is not restricted in Turkish. This can be another example against Landau's generalizations. Finally, to conclude, Hebrew and Turkish behave different in such environments as agent including readings, argumental adverbs, predicate nominals, naming verbs, argumental measure phrases, chunks of non-decomposable idioms, and conjunction constructions. Some of them are restricted by semantic type. Some of them behave differently, while, for example, chunks of non-decomposable idioms, the elided item can be an individual in Turkish, but not in Hebrew. They behave differently. When the argument ellipsis definition of Landau is taken into account, it seems like in Turkish, the impossible environments for argument ellipsis are actually not impossible. It is the case that verb standing, it's not the case that verb standing ellipsis cannot cover every environment where argument ellipsis occurs. Therefore, we can conclude that the domain of existence of verb standing ellipsis is actually the superset of the domain of existence of argument ellipsis in Turkish, which is completely the opposite of what Landau suggests in his analysis. Then I conclude that Turkish has verb standing VP ellipsis, and in fact, object gap in Turkish are only instances of verb standing VP ellipsis. Thank you. Thank you.
It's very interesting presentations, and thank you very much for that. I'd like to ask two very simple questions because I'm not as competition, if that's okay. So the first one is, when trying the replacement test, the word davranmak, you mentioned that the phrase nasıl davrandı is ungrammatical. What's the sorry? What is that phrase ungrammatical? Is it about relevancy, or because syntactically, what's wrong with it syntactically?
Thank you for your question. Here, nazlı davranmadı is ungrammatical because davranmadı needs the argumental adverb there, iyi or kötü. So therefore, this structure is ungrammatical. I don't know if I was able to answer it.
The second question is, why is the language that Turkish is compared to about the argument ellipsis specifically Hebrew? Was that just a coincidence, or?
No, great question again. It is compared to Hebrew because I follow Landau's analysis on verb standing and argumental ellipsis, and he claimed that verb standing VP ellipsis is does not exist basically. So my claim is that verb standing VP ellipsis does actually exist. So I followed his analysis on the non-existence of verb standing VP ellipsis. So yeah, therefore his analysis was on Hebrew. Therefore I compared them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
This is just a curiosity about Turkish. So you have by the way, this is very convincing and interesting talk. One question is, so you have shown that the number of elided items are not necessarily of type E. Did you try with quantifiers?
I have not yet.
That would be interesting.
Yes. Thank you.
Because
I will,
they would be like, they look like arguments, they're not gonna be left arguments if they are in object position, but they're still, if you can imagine, it's like Mary read every book, Bill not read, meaning every book. Yeah, that's a very simple case, so that's why it's a curiosity. I don't know how it works in Turkey.
Right, so you have a primary position and
And the reading will be not every, or every not. What is the interpretation? So, Ali, here, Mary didn't.
yeah.
Well, Turkish is close to school. It shouldn't be, but if it is, that would be interesting.
Thank you. That's
Just something, food for your thoughts in the next 3 months.
Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting, especially the parts where you tested these argument ellipsis cases and you showed that they don't work for Turkish. That part especially was very interesting. I work in the exactly same topic. It was my main thesis. And
So that is what my main thesis topic, and my conclusion was also that representative ellipsis exists in the language. It must exist, otherwise the conclusion cases cannot get accounted for. But there was one case that I could not explain partly the representative ellipsis, and it actually comes from Kanero paper. Those are they are basically objects with causative objects preceding instrumental phrases. So when we
say, for example, Ali arkadaşlarını birbirleriyle tanıştırdı. Ali introduces friends to each other.
Can say that, but we cannot say Ali birbirleriyle arkadaşlarını tanıştırdı. So basically, instrumental phrases cannot precede causative phrases. So if we say Ali arkadaşlarımı birbirleriyle tanıştırdı, Ahmet ise birbirleriyle yarıştırdı. For example, this birbirleriyle must have moved from the prior to ellipsis. So the arkadaşlarını, the accusative must precede it in the representative phrasal ellipsis analysis. If you know what that is. The gap must be before birbirleriyle. But this cannot happen because instrumental phrase cannot be preceded by ellipsis. It was the only case that I could not account for with the representative phrase ellipsis. So I'm just wondering if you ever thought about it, if you have any thoughts on it.
Thank you for your comment. I didn't consider that construction, but it looks very interesting and it's completely against what I claim. Maybe argument ellipsis and verb strength ellipsis, they both occur and they both exist, and maybe like the domain of existence is of either of them is not as pursuit of the other one. So maybe we can conclude that both exist using that.
I would love to hold after this.
Yeah, I would love to. So, yeah. Thank you.
Yes, that's fine. Okay. I don't know much about the but I wonder whether in classical work also be language or not. Because in Turkish
it is not, it's still there.
in the like pattern.
I
in the
couldn't hear, sorry.
the lexical verb. You don't like in English, you can totally elide the verb, lexical verb, keeping you know, inflection behind, or you can use do so type of constructions. I wonder whether this has an effect, because it would allow you to reconstruct all the possible arguments and etc. Because you see the lexical verb in the elided pattern. Turkish also has another pattern of ellipsis, which is öyle yaptı or öyle yapmadı. Have you taken a look at those constructions and have you observed any, you know, asymmetries between the two patterns? İşte Ali keki hızlıca yedi, Ayşe öyle yapmadı. Or Ali keki hızlıca yedi, Ayşe yemedi. So I was wondering. First, the Hebrew case, I'm curious about Hebrew, whether it's like the English type or Turkish type.
To be honest, I don't remember how it is in Hebrew, but in Turkish, I tried to consider those constructions. I thought of them, but I couldn't manage to like come up with a reasonable explanation for it. Maybe it could be a future work for after this. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Two things. Thank you so much, Nagihan. The first thing, why exactly do you call it verb stranding VP ellipsis? Because nothing higher than the VP can be also deleted, right?
Thank
In
you.
a way, like all the arguments and agents so far seem to be in the satellite of the VP. That's true. But how about adverbs that are higher? Like Ahmet, I don't know, like a temporal adverb like dün. Ahmet dün geldi, Ali gelmedi. Would it still be like a VP ellipsis? If the verb stranding? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Sure, yes,
Would
it depends on where Din is taking scope over, so it might be before, add those adjuncts to the option of the second one. It's called the verb ellipsis because it's
Small helper. Okay.
so everything else goes like.
Yeah, but speaker oriented adverbs don't work, right? Like Ali galiba geldi, Ayşe gelmedi. That doesn't. I can understand that.
Yeah, well, that's about like where you're looking for niche.
Right. Yes, exactly. Okay, never mind. Thank you. And the second thing, I don't know if you really want. It's already convincing every case. I don't know if you would really want to go to these idioms that have to be stranded because that's really a turning issue. Like, what idioms can be divided, what cannot. I'm not going to give judgments for Astrolog once told me I should never give judgments on citation. But it seems completely gibberish to me. This avlama, sinek, no, that's no go. You already have enough data. You already have enough convincing things, right?
Yeah,
It seems like, yeah.
Yes, but I want to test the exactly the tests that are observed on Hebrew on Turkish, but it was really hard to work on idioms, I have to admit. So maybe I wouldn't continue with those because it seems like they all they can behave differently from one another because the elided item can be an individual or something else in different idioms. So maybe I can drop them, maybe I can find something much more convincing.
The people who work on relative clauses have been struggling for years and years about this idioms. It's a problem unresolved. You can't really. So maybe it can just weaken your point.
Thank you.
it was a fun slide.
Thank you, Nagihan. I think, okay, I can sit now.
Thank you. You know, there is this variation between, you know, Turkish and Hebrew, right? So where is that included? Like, what does it correlate with? Is it about finality? Is it, why does a language have the person ellipsis and the other doesn't? You know, is there any bigger picture to see here?
So, thank you. Lambda claims that using these environments, it claims that verb semi-ellipsis does not exist at all. That's why I use the Hebrew name. I don't think they share some characteristics. I'm not really sure, but I really want to focus on the non-existence of verb semi-ellipsis by showing that it exists in Turkish. The only reason why I use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nagihan. And thanks all the presenters for this session. Thanks all the presenters for this wonderful session. We have done like coffee break, we have coffee and snacks downstairs. We'll see you here at 12 to listen to our invited speaker, Junko Kanero.
Hi everyone, welcome back. We continue with our first invited speaker, Dr. Junko Kanero. Dr. Kanero holds a PhD in developmental psychology and neuroscience from Temple University. She conducted her doctoral studies under the supervision of Dr. Kathy Pershpasek. After her postgraduate studies, she held a postdoctoral position at Koç University and worked with Tilbe Göksun and Aylin Güntay. She has been an assistant professor of psychology at Sabancı University since 2019. And she is also the primary investigator of Mind, Language and Technology Lab there. Her studies focus on exploring language phenomena as a means to understand the human cognitive system. She works on topics such as language development, technology in education and social communication, neural processing of language, and how language interacts with other cognitive processes. I invite Dr. Kanero to deliver her speech titled Putting Person in the Equation, Role of Individual Differences in the Language Thought Interplay.
Okay. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you all for coming to my talk today. Let's see if I can make it work properly. I think it is working. I shouldn't be showing my password, but whatever. Okay. There we go. So, oh, it's duplicated. Okay. All right, let's see. Do I need the numbers? No, it's fine. Okay. All right, sorry for that. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again. And so, as Omer already mentioned, today I'll be talking about how we can put the person into the discussion of language and thought interplay. So the last part of his introduction about my research interest. So here is the, oh yeah, I cannot move on. All right, so here is the big question, and I'm assuming all of you are at least familiar with this idea of like a linguistic relativity, or maybe you can go for it to say linguistic determinism type of thing. And I don't know how you guys all feel about it, but the question is just so basically whether language affects the thought, meaning like a non-linguistic cognition we often talk about, meaning like, you know, attention or memory or categorization and classification, etc. These things we do all the time, everyday life, but does it actually get affected by kind of languages we talk? And here is like, I mean, this is a question has been asked for so long. So here's Plato actually making a comment related to this idea. So this is actually exactly a quote, though of course translated from a sophist. The thought and the speech are the same, with this exception that what is called the thought is that unauthorized conversation of the soul with himself. So from this point, what he is implying is that Like basically the language and thought are something kind of interchangeable, the same thing. And you cannot really think outside of language. And later on, there are some other scholars who have echoed this kind of perspective. So here's one example from Harder, but this is not the quote now, but basically suggesting that we can never think outside of language. And then meaning that our thought is actually limited by the exact language we are learning and using. And this idea also has been supported or advocated by other scholars as well. And then finally, so these ones I'm not really sure if you're familiar with, but I'm assuming all of you are familiar with Benjamin Lebor and also Sapir. So these people are the people actually came up with a real research question, let's say, instead of just discussing about does actually true language affect thought or language and thought are very much related to each other. They actually came up with the idea of okay, so depending on the language you speak, you might be actually thinking differently. And this is the idea of linguistic relativity. So in the original sentence, though this idea, the Wolffian hypothesis, have many different versions. But originally speaking, the idea was that the language is determining that, and therefore speakers of the different languages like English, Turkish, etc., think differently. And this idea has been explored in many different fields, mainly psycholinguistics, but also in other fields too, to really see is it really the case? How does it work? But today though, I'm not going to actually talk about this classic debate because the conclusion, I think, kind of exists in a sense. Language can affect thought, meaning how you actually, what you pay attention to, what you memorize in your everyday life. Though things has been debated more often in the past decade or two, is what the mechanism is exactly. So if the language is actually affecting how we think or how we behave to some extent at least, what is the underlying mechanism? And there are many ways to explore this question experimentally, empirically. But one of the common behavioral methods that has been used is called verbal interference. Any of you familiar? Actually, how many of you are familiar with the idea? I'm trying to get the idea of who the audience is. Okay, good. Then let me just give some detailed description of it. So verbal interference, sometimes we call it a shadowing, or sometimes we call it, there are other names too. But the idea is that if we are actually getting affected by language you use, there are many different mechanisms you can imagine. One way you can think of is, while we are trying to memorize something or paying attention to something, that we are thinking in language, like online use meaning that. So how do we human behave when the online use of language is actually inhibited is the question that verbal interference manipulation is asking. And it sounds like big, but it's a really simple idea. So you have this main cognitive task. It could be about attention, it could be about memory, or it could be about something else. But concurrently, together with that main task, you ask the participants to actually keep repeating specific linguistic sounds. So it could be like a nonsense syllable, could be like a ba, da, ti, or something. Or it could be like a numbers. Number is very common. So like a 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2. And they just keep repeating actually out loud these specific speech sounds. And what you're trying to see is that if the behavior in the main cognitive task actually gets affected by this extra burden. And the premise here is the last part. So if a particular behavior you observed without any interference is actually disrupted or disappear with the verbal interference, that must mean that the behavior is actually coming from the use of language. Because the idea is your language system is occupied with this verbal interference, the extra task you're doing. So you're going to really use the language on spot anymore for the main task you're trying to work on. And this has been used of many studies. So as I'm quoting here, not quoting, citing here. And just to give you a bit more idea about it, let me show you some examples. This study is super famous, so some of you might be familiar with that. So Winnower and his colleagues basically looked at this color language. And what they actually did was looking into the comparison between Russian language and the English language. And what they did, the reason they went with these two languages is that because in Russian, there are two separate labels for light blue and dark blue, gold boy and the sea. While in English, that is not the case. You just have one word, blue. Though, of course, you can say that dark and light and adjective to actually be more specific. And what they did was looking into these two categories and try to ask the question of whether for Russian speakers, this distinction between two colors, two shades of blue is easier or not, just because they have two labels. And here you have two trials. So one is a within category trial, meaning that the having a label shouldn't help. So there's a target at the top, and then your job is to decide which one of the two choices at the bottom is the same as the target. But in this case, all of them are blue boy in Russian too, and all of them are blue in English. So it shouldn't matter if you're an English speaker or Russian speaker, either way, it's just the same task. While a cross-category trial on the right is actually, if you really have a sensitivity, heighten the sensitivity to this distinction because of the color labels, then you should be able to actually have an easier time distinguishing between choice 1 and the choice 2. And as a result, you might actually show better performance, meaning Russian speakers might have a better performance. And basically that is exactly what they found. So Russian speakers were first in the cross-category trial, then the within-category trial. So they actually showed the benefits of having these two different labels in their language. But then here's the verbal interference. The difference disappeared when the verbal interference was introduced to the task. So when the participant needed to keep saying the number while they are doing this choice task. So that's one example. Let's look at another one. This is a chore and a half draft from 2012. And what they used in this case was looking into this two labels, again, existing in the Korean language, but not in the English language, which is the distinction between tight on and the loose on, which is probably easier to explain if I actually show the example. Let's see. Okay, so what we mean by tight on is that it's one object on top of another object, but it's tightly fitted together. While what we mean by loose on is something like, one object on the other object, but it's not really like a tight fit or anything. It's just loosely on each other. And then there's a tight in example. So it's tight and one object going inside of the other, and also tight on example here. That is actually in English, it is on. So it's supported by another object, but the relation is tight instead of being loose. So for Korean speakers, tight on and loose on actually have two separate verbs, while English speakers usually just use these prepositions to distinguish just about the fact that support and the containment relationship exists. And if you do this non-conflict trial, what you see is actually, because non-conflict meaning that it doesn't matter if it's English, if you're English speaker or Korean speaker, the answer is kind of clear. So the target is tight on, and then you're supposed to choose another one that is exactly like what close to the target. And then Korean speaker, English speaker, both of them went for tight on. Makes sense. It's there's no other way to go. But then conflicting trial, meaning that depending on which aspect you're paying attention to, meaning the tightness of the relation or the support and the containment relationship, you might choose one or the other. And that's exactly what they found here. So showing again that depending on kind of labels you have in the language, you might actually pay attention to different aspects of the event. Again, what's happening here is that, so first off, whenever there's a conflict, they actually chose according to their language. That's good. But then with the verbal interference stuff, they actually saw still the difference between the speakers of two languages. So verbal interference, as I kind of implied already, has been used a lot to actually say that, okay, so there's like this on-spot, online use of language happening in categorizing things or paying attention to different aspects of the event. But some studies actually do find the verbal interference eliminate these cross-linguistic differences in the main task, and it's suggesting that language has an online influence on that. Well, other studies, though much less, to be honest. And Hakrab is one of the examples that, no, even with the verbal interference, this cross-linguistic differences actually don't disappear, suggesting that so language is making differences in how people are categorizing things. But then this is more of what we can call offline influence, meaning that the habitual use of language over time might make you more sensitive to specific aspect of the event than the other aspect. And the debate goes, honestly, like there are so many studies actually trying to use the manipulation and figure out what's happening. But today, though, actually, even though I spent a lot of time explaining it, this is not exactly my focus. My focus is like, maybe that's not exactly, we shouldn't just continue testing all different cases using the manipulation. Partially because it's a bit difficult to say anything. Because like, these tasks or these studies we've seen, it's different in so many aspects. Like it's very difficult to say like, oh, is it about the color or tightness, looseness relation, or maybe something else? So maybe another possibility is that because people actually have a different tendency to use language or to verbalize something, maybe that is actually causing at least some differences. Meaning that some people like to use language in thinking about something, while other people actually prefer to use more visual, spatial, for instance, kind of thinking. There are clearly differences if just across individuals, and that is actually the main topic today. So let's take a look at one of the old study I have. First, let me explain to you the material I used back then. So this is a very well-known questionnaire called the Visualizer Questionnaire. And the idea is it's just 20 questions asking about the tendency, preference, and ability the individual has in terms of verbalizing something, so using language, or visualizing something in the head. So some examples would be verbalize a question. I enjoy doing work that require the use of words. Like I'm just enjoying using words if I like it. And the visualize a question would be like, I like newspaper articles that have graphs. So it's just a simple idea of just asking questions to see if each individual has a specific tendency about how they use language and how they actually visualize things. And you might think like this is too simple and verifiable or self-report. So like, can we actually trust this? I will not go into too much detail into this study, but there are actually even like some neuro studies suggesting that yes, like the brain actually does show different activation patterns depending on if you're a verbalizer or visualizer. If any of you are actually interested in this specific study, I can explain it better. But the point is, there are actually not just a self-report, but suggesting that these different tendencies do exist. Some people are more like a visualizer, and some people are more like a verbalizer. So based on this idea of individual differences, Kevin Holmes is one of the main person I work with, but also with his student, Patrick Harshpasek is my advisor. So all of us actually did a study back in the day, but this was actually my very first attempt to try to see how individual differences actually play a role in this language and thought debate or the linguistic relativity discussion. So in this study, we actually did what we call change detection. I'll tell you in a second about what exactly that is, but first let me show you the bit of demographic details. So this was just a study we did with undergraduate students mainly. And what we did was, again, the verbal interference. So we actually had a verbal interference condition, half of the participants, a bit less than half of the participants. And then we had a 68 English, so 53 English speakers for a verbal interference condition, and then 68 English speakers for no interference condition. And the main task, so this is the manipulation we added, but the main task was what we call change detection task. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. So this, I'm showing you two pictures side by side, but what we do is actually alternating them. And also you need a masking between as well. Any idea where the difference between these two pictures is? It's just 1 point difference. Oh yeah, I guess we cannot draft them now. I think, but you got it. Which one? Can you actually? Yes. Okay, yeah, some of you got it. Some of you are a bit lost, I guess. Which is understandable. This blue box thing is actually here on the left side, but missing on the right side. And again, it's not really a side-by-side presentation we do. Usually in the classic task, this was developed by Resnick, and what we do in this task is basically just alternating them, and you have to spot the difference between the two alternating pictures. So again, another task that does not really require language. This is actually key point. You don't have to use language, but if you want, you could. So if you actually are really of a verbalizer, you could be thinking like, okay, so the boy looks exactly the same, but then this is green and this is, I guess, the same. You could do that, or you can just purely look at them and then just purely visually, perceptually solve the task as well. And what did we find, or what do we do actually? So verbal interference condition, because it was an online study, what we did was first showing this number string and then asking the participants to do the change detection task, and then going on to asking like which of the number string they actually saw. Because it was an online, we couldn't really listen to them. So we actually made sure that they kept this number string in their mind by asking them to actually choose the correct answer at the end. And then finally, like asking them to just describe the change happened between two alternating pictures. So this is the verbal interference condition, and no interference condition to compare with is just purely the change detection task. So again, the alternating pictures, and then the participant was asked to describe the change between the two pictures. And what did we find here? So what we found here is this is a purely correlation study. So as I said, this is one of the first attempts I had back then. I think still it's a cool study, so I'm presenting, but I mean, it's correlational. So here what we found though is that accuracy in the task was negatively correlated with verbalizer score, but not with the visualizer score. So verbalizer tendency seems to actually will be related to how well the participants were doing, and then also with the reaction time as well. That's the second bullet point. And overall, what we are seeing is visualizer score actually didn't predict anything, or wasn't correlated with anything. But higher verbalizer score actually predicted faster, but less accurate the change detection, suggesting that like, this verbalizer tendency might actually helping the participant to solve the task in a specific way. And just to compare with, we had this sorry, which one is which? This one was the yes. So when you actually disrupt the use of language by using verbal interferences, adding verbal interferences, what we found out was no longer verbalizer score was correlated with the task performance, either accuracy or reaction time, suggesting that when language use was disrupted, individual differences in verbalization no longer predicted the performance, meaning that this again must be actually about how you are on spot thinking in language, and that is how you are, I mean, how verbalizers at least might be solving this non-linguistic task. So starting from this pretty basic study, I decided to actually go much further in really discovering and exploring like how individual differences really can make a difference in how we are using language and how we are affected by language. So far we're just talking about style of thinking, meaning like a verbalizer, visualizer, but mainly verbalizer tendency. Here's another study. So this was a thesis study by my former master's student, Tunala, and she's at the University of British Columbia doing a PhD now. And this was study about grammatical gender now. And the grammatical gender is a particularly interesting topic because it is really, basically arbitrary. So it's not really like something like tight and loose or support and the containment we talked about, or could be color. All of these things actually have a perceptual basis. Like we have some tendency without language. But grammatical gender category is often the time like it's just introduced by the specific language you learned and you are speaking. So here, for instance, we can take a look at this nice picture I took a few years ago on the Bosphorus. And then if you actually look at some of the objects here, that here's the sun in English, and that would be masculine if you are a Spanish speaker. It would be feminine if you're an Arabic speaker, and it would be neutral if you are, this is a Czech speaker. And in the same way, if you look at the boat, you can say this is more like, it is a feminine in the Italian language, and this is masculine in French, and this is neutral in German. So what you can see here is really each language specifically choosing these gender, not really exactly related to the nature of that. Of course, there are some labeling happening in grammatical gender that is related to the actual nature of things, but like there are many things completely arbitrary, basically. And there are a lot of languages in the world making use of grammatical gender, though Turkish, for instance, doesn't really have it. English doesn't either. So it's kind of funny that we are actually talking about this in this context. And so actually almost 40% of the world languages use some kind of grammatical gender, or what suggests like 10 years ago. And then there are other estimates too, but many languages do, is the point here. And again, as I already mentioned, that grammatical gender is often the time unrelated to the appearance of or the other physical property of a specific object. And unlike these categories like a color, it could be actually better way to look into the language of thought debate because it doesn't really have any perceptual basis. Oh, by the way, I have like this OSF link, the left bottom corner. These are just preprint because this study is actually under review right now, so it's not published yet. So if you want to look at the preprint, you can actually access that link as well. And I'll just keep those links at the corner. So here in grammatical gender study, what we did was we had 3 studies, main studies, looking into first, actually looking into Turkish native speakers to actually see that how it look like, how the categorization look like if we look into the language that doesn't have grammatical gender at all. And the Turkish case is actually even more extreme, according to many theorists, because in English, at least you have a pronouns like he, she, that distinguish gender, but in Turkish, you don't even do that. So this is a very good control to actually show like, okay, how does it look like if you don't have any grammatical gender in the language? And then we looked at the French speaker in study 2. And also we had a study 3 French speaker. I didn't mention here, but this study 3 is actually a verbal interference study again. So doing the same task, but under verbal interference. And what we did was a lot more vigorous, let's say, than like any of the previous study have done. So first off, we wanted to make sure that kind of object we are testing are not just like something that doesn't really have like any gender associated with. We actually included many different kinds of objects, including varying in terms of grammatical gender. So you can see the masculine object and a feminine object. But also we actually made some conflicts basically. So a lot of objects we use actually had like a more of a stereotypically female feature or female association or stereotypically male association, because in our everyday life we actually do have many of these objects as well. So we wanted to see that not just looking at like a neutral object. We tested the neutral object too, but like really looking into a survey of the things that are actually existing in our everyday environment. And what we did, so that's the one thing interesting about this study. But another thing interesting about the study is that we did an implicit association test, meaning that instead of actually just asking them to like choose an option, we actually didn't even tell the participant that this was a study about the grammatical gender. So participants didn't really know the idea. And what we did was, this is slightly complicated for people who are not familiar with, but basically the idea is, oh, maybe this is actually a better picture. So you have like, two different trials, and some are congruent trial, meaning that if you have to categorize them. I'm not explaining it super straightforward. So your job as a participant is pressing a button, left or right, and then to categorize the object shown on the screen. And then either about like something about the gender of the face, actually. So there's a face trial. In this face trial, you're just purely indicating the gender of that person. And then there's an object trial where you are just categorizing them based on whether they are clothing items or more of like tools. And then finally, in later trial, you actually have two of them together. So faces and the object are presented together. And some of them are congruent trial because it doesn't really matter. Even the object, this object is stereotypically feminine, it's a skirt. And then like it doesn't matter, you can focus on this feminineness, or you can focus on the fact that it is a clothing item. Either way, it's left. So it's a congruent trial in a sense of it's easy. You can focus on either way, and it is actually classifiable. While incongruent trial actually have a conflict. So if you actually look at this next time and think about that, which is a clothing item, then it should be on the left. But then if you accidentally think about how this is stereotypically masculine, then you might actually push right. So that is what we mean by incongruent trial. And we're just trying to see that the error rate and the accuracy get affected or not because of this conflict happening here. And in addition to this implicit one, we actually had an explicit gender attribution task as well, just to see afterward. After the implicit task, we did the explicit task too, just to see if they actually show that stereotypical classification of these items as well. And finally, what did we find in this study? So first up, in terms of the effect of this congruency we just talked about, we saw that the grammatical gender as well as stereotypical gender actually affected. So both of them are actually affecting the performance of participants. So they are getting actually influence from these categories. And if you're actually familiar with like how you were doing like R and other software, this is the equation that we put it on for that model 1, no, model 2 actually, model 1B, sorry. And what we see is yes, so that you see the significant result actually, showing that the both types of gender, so grammatical gender and also the gender stereotypes that we have is actually slowing us down and also making the error rate change as well. So this is one of the examples, but we can actually talk about all the other studies too, because as I said, there are 3 studies we did. So the first study was Turkish sample. As expected, they were affected by stereotypical gender. So this is more of a conceptual gender as we expected, but they were not affected by this French grammatical gender. I mean, they're Turkish speakers. So that was as expected. And the French people, on the other hand, what we found was grammatical gender actually had an effect, and the stereotypical gender had an effect as well, both in the implicit and the explicit test. The explicit one, grammatical gender, was actually more like a trending, like a 0.0, I mean, 0.5 or something. So it's like almost as significant, but technically, according to classic test, not really significant yet. And then finally, for the verbal interference, what we saw was actually the effect on French speaker actually disappeared, meaning that, so this is actually because they are employing language on spot. And then when the language is actually not available to be used, they actually didn't show the influence of language. But this is already interesting, hopefully. But here the point is actually looking into individual differences. And this we actually went to a really interesting direction of looking into the gender role attitude. So here's another scale we introduced after the main tasks, the gender role attitude scale, basically asking about the attitude about the gender to participants. And some items would be, I mean, one of the items was boys have the same obligation to help with the household or chores as girls. And then just asking 20 items, totally disagree or totally agree, to just see the attitude of the individual. And this is the main focus here. So high score means more egalitarian or, let's say, less sexist kind of attitude. And what we found, so we are looking at the grammatical gender, but we are actually testing like in this gender as in biological gender. And what we found out was here, so we are putting person into the equation, as I said in the title too. So we actually included this gender attitude scores to the model, and what we found out was actually that interaction exists, meaning that, all right. So first up, that people are, both Turkish and the French speaker, were affected by gender stereotypes. So like these genders stereotypically associated with object. So gender bias, so people who are more gender biased found the trial matching with gender stereotypes easier. This is kind of expected actually, compared to their less gender biased counterpart. And this is, for instance, there's a classic study by them suggesting that the gender-related association are more accessible or prominent in people with gender-biased attitude. So this is kind of expected. But then, for our grammatical gender too, we actually show that there was an interaction between grammatical gender and the gender attitude. So grammatical gender congruence was also easier for gender biased French speaker than their less gender biased peers, meaning that the people actually have like a kind of stereotype, like a stronger stereotype about gender actually got affected not just by stereotypical or conceptual gender, but also by grammatical gender. And then also like in explicit gender assignment, we actually found some effect as well. So overall, suggesting that, so this effective language was modulated by the mindset of the individual, and which has kind of nothing to do with language. So it's not really just about style of thinking that we talk about, verbalizer, visualizer tendency, but also these like stereotypes outside of language seems to actually affect the relation as well. And I hope I have time to mention one more study at least. There are a lot more on this line of research, but I'll just mention one more. Another study done by back to the master's student, Ege, and she's now doing a PhD at the Indiana University, looking at the time and the space. And the time and space, again, another really interesting example here, because time we talk about and think about all the time, but we cannot really perceive once again. Time is something you actually need extra thing to talk about, and usually we use space. And what do we mean by this? So here, for instance, you can see a picture showing someone waking up, someone working somewhere, and also having a dinner, etc. And if you actually think about how you would align these things, you would actually make use of space. And if you're a Turkish speaker or English speaker, or maybe many other languages too, what you would usually do is from left to right, because that is how you actually form a mental timeline. So instead of like the time existing as on its own, but you actually use the space to actually think about how time is organized in our head. And here idea is yet another individual differences. Here we are talking about the spatial ability, how that might actually affect how we think about time. And just to clarify, our mental timeline that we know is affected by writing direction often the time. So the English is left to right, the Turkish as well, but Aymara language, for instance, actually have a different way of conceptualizing, and Mandarin might be more familiar to you also, like this up-down, because the writing direction, again, is actually showing from the top to the bottom. There are many theories actually suggesting this is at least affecting that how we are forming this mental timeline in our head. And based on this idea, there was a very famous study by Broditsky's team. So I actually put her first and forgot to remove her first name. That Spatial back in 2014 looked at this very interesting case of patients with spatial neglect. So these people who actually have a damage on the brain, and then just tend to actually neglect anything appearing on the left side of the visual field. And then if you actually think about this mental timeline, that if you don't see the left side, it would be difficult to think about the past events, because on your mental timeline, if you're an English speaker, the past event or earlier event will go to the left side of the timeline. And that's exactly what they found. So the first thing that you see here is actually these neglected patients actually had a hard time remembering the past event presented, but they were actually kind of, as good as everyone else for the future event. So this data was used to argue that, okay, so we do actually have this mental timeline, and this ability to actually see the different side of the visual field is actually affecting how we can formulate mental timeline. And so what we did was actually really just adapting their task and testing in neurotypical participants, because right now we are just talking about this neglect patients, but with the same argument that people's spatial ability to actually think about this mental timeline should actually affect how well they can think about time and the use like time-related language as well. So here what we did was, again, the native Turkish speaker participated in the study, and in the learning phase, we actually showed this is exactly the same task as the subject all did. So like just asking participants to remember about the object, and the object is associated with a specific time point, like 10 years ago or 10 years later, etc. And then afterwards, they have to recall these items and also recognize these items. And after recognition, they have to indicate, is it 10 years ago or 10 years later as well. And what's different from the original study is because we are testing a neurotypical population and try to see the individual differences. What we did was a mental rotation task we talked about earlier today, but this is the adult version of it. And also number line estimation task is another spatial task we included. And once again, the verbal and the visual style of processing. This is another skill, but really similar idea, testing again that whether individual has a tendency to verbalize stuff. And here what we found was, maybe I have to actually kind of skip the description of this older part, but overall, what we found was when we introduced these individual difference factors, as we suspected that this mental rotation task, the third line, the spatial ability was actually predicting how well they are recognizing these items, and also verbal ability, they are uniquely predicted. So maybe some participants are actually using more of a spatial ability to align things and remember the items very well, while other more of a verbalizer type of participants might be actually relying on language to remember everything. So this is a recall task, and then it was basically really similar idea for recognition task as well. If we introduce these individual differences, we saw that again, the mental rotation task, the spatial ability was predicting the performance, and also the verbalizer tendency too. And overall, what we saw is, once again, the style of thinking, are you verbalizer or not, is affecting. And also this, again, non-linguistic ability of how well you are organizing space, basically, was affecting that performance. And as I said, that I'm going to skip the other ones. So the other ones are actually looking into these like bilingual populations. So other ones actually suggest, other studies are suggesting that also the proficiency in the second language, for instance, or age of exposure, if you are very much good proficient bilingual. These things are also, according to my other studies, are correlated or predicting the kind of performance, how much of an effect language seems to have in your thinking that is supposedly non-linguistic. And also we actually have we look at the other parts of the interplay between language and thought as well. So this last part actually is talking about role of executive function on language processing. This is actually, we will be presenting. So tomorrow I actually have to go to another conference in Ankara because we will be actually presenting this one. If any of you are actually interested in the second language or the bilingual study or this other way around type of study, please let me know as well. Anyhow, so overall, just going back to the first question we had, does language affect that? So hopefully I did a kind of okay job in convincing you that this is not exactly the question we ask anymore. I mean, you can still ask it, but maybe more interesting question is actually to think about these individuals and also more detailed about the exact condition we are looking into. So to whom or in whom and under what condition does language affect that? Is that question I have been working on, and I hope that you actually find it interesting as well. And this is just a little thank you slide to some of my students, and not all of them here. And also I would like to thank all the people who are participating in the studies, and also to the audience. Thank you very much. Yeah, I wrapped a bit because I thought I didn't have time.
We can have questions.
Hi, thank you for such a lovely talk. You mentioned a bit about reading direction kind of affected this mental timeline that we had. Could you maybe speak on a little bit on how people would, I guess, envisage this timeline when they are speaking a language that doesn't have a written script, so there is no reading direction?
Oh, very good question. Do I actually know any? No, I actually only, I don't want to lie about it. So that on top of my head, I actually cannot think of like any empirical study. Though there should be like some tendency, of course, there. But it gets a bit difficult because like when you actually go to this community and try to test out the task itself is so weird. So like for participants, like it's okay, what does it mean? Like I have to align these pictures type of thing happen as well. But no, I actually on top of my head, I'm not sure. Really good question there.
Yeah, thank you. I was at a conference that was super focused on these number line studies, and they didn't have an answer for me either. So
I'll actually do a bit more research because that part of my knowledge is slightly outdated. So there could be a bit more like research stuff. If I find anything, I'll let you know.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
So about the gender experiment. So it's a great experiment in the sense that it shows that uninterpreted features like gender, things that seem to be grammatical gender seems to be arbitrary, and that seems to have an impact, especially for French. What I was wondering is whether you have any thoughts about the implicit correlation between the French grammatical gender system and stereotypical gender, and if there's a certain amount of correlation in there to the degree that it's actually the stereotypical gender that's having an impact, and whether you would consider or you would expect to see similar effects in languages that have very complex class systems, like the Metehan, for example. And you know, any thoughts on that?
So no, that is a really good point because actually, as I briefly said in the beginning here, like some words are actually really based on the actual the stereotypical or the biological gender, actually, like us get assigned a specific grammatical gender based on that. But then here though, what we try to do is actually having like all different combination. So to actually eliminate that kind of a possibility. So some objects are like masculine in terms of grammatical gender, but feminine in terms of stereotypical gender, and you can see like, you know, both matching or mismatching, like all these cases. So in that sense, and also statistically too, we actually found like independent effect of them. So yes, they are overall definitely existing in actual language, but then I think we actually captured these unique influence of these two types of language, two types of gender. You had a second question? Maybe I missed it.
It was essentially about would you predict something similar in Bantu languages where you have this tons of class systems.
Right.
Classes are essentially genders, right? So but there's like way too many of them compared to three gender languages.
Right, and that I should be able to actually answer because my native language actually has like a bunch of classifiers, and And also, I actually have done many classifier study, not many, but some classifier study too. Though, so yes, there are actually some studies suggesting, now I can, suggesting that the classifier do affect how you categorize as well. Though, again, it's not like, for instance, in Japanese, technically there are hundreds of them also. But then this study, of course, looking at the subset of like very common classifiers and everything. So it's a bit difficult to say like it doesn't work for everything, like it is frequent one. But like yes, there's actually evidence suggesting, though we're not talking about a really big effect now. So like stereotypical or conceptual, like these classification we have seems to actually have like a bigger impact after the time. But yes, classifiers, other categories that have more categorization does affect how we categorize stuff too.
Thank you. There's this language in, let's see, I'm looking at the Wikipedia server. This is the Australian language, Payor, I believe. Have you inspected any language such as this one? Because this doesn't have any sort of linear time cognitive abilities, I think. They identify the time using the geological like such as south and north, if you know what I mean.
Wait, I didn't hear the last part, sorry.
South and north, they
south and north, yeah, sure. But
they're using those expressions to express times.
yeah, exactly.
And
And
again, like because they use that as a actually like which language are you talking about?
Payor, I believe it's pronounced Payor.
Because there are too many like indigenous languages in Australia, so I'm not really sure if I'm talking about that language. I don't think so. But yes, there are many languages actually. First off, like for space, they actually use the cardinal direction in a sense. I mean, instead of saying like a left-right kind of thing. And then that could be applied to actually conceptualize time too. But then in terms of how that would actually affect our kind of study. That's a really interesting question. I don't think I have any base to actually say anything. I haven't seen any study like that, so I'm not quite sure if I can say, if I can make any comments on it. But it would be super interesting to actually have them participate in this kind of study.
I have one, I think, 3 more questions. But
oh, 3 more questions, nice.
One of them is, have you studied English people who refer to the pronouns, pronouns of things like boats and cars as she? I believe they do this.
Yes, true. And actually, that's why there are distinction between like English and Turkish, for instance. So like when people actually talk about that grammatical gender, they actually have like 2 categorizations. So grammatical gender language and the natural gender language is like English. Meaning like again pronouns do have gender, and the Turkish is like not at all gender. Like you have to use a lexical item to actually specify gender. So those distinctions definitely exist. And yes, as you were saying, that this kind of use of gendered pronouns exists as well. But then I would argue that that's a kind of like other way around. So that you're actually conceptualizing this card, for instance, as a female entity, and then as a result you are using a specific pronoun. Though yes, the continuous and habitual use of this kind of pronoun might be affecting, but then like a direction of position, I guess, is like more like you conceptualize it first and then start using the specific pronoun. I don't know if I probably didn't answer your question, but yes, some thought on that.
Well, I want to actually talk about you after this. Maybe
excellent.
It's better if I do that.
Yes, probably that is better if we can have some back and forth. Did you have 2 more questions or?
Well, I can ask.
Okay, I see. Okay, sounds good.
I was wondering about the experiment design and the
grammatical gender one, you said people who are more biased took more time. Am I correct on that?
So yeah, this I probably should have spent a bit longer time on this, but basically maybe I can share that. Oh wait, there we go. Is this one better? No, probably this one is. No, so like I mean by easy, so like because it's get really like wordy if I try to actually explain everything. So what I mean by easier is like just that they actually had a less error. We actually analyze nice you asked it. Analyze the accuracy, the error rate, as well as the reaction time. But then they were actually like the same pattern both ways. So easier time, I'm kind of summarizing both of them. So these people actually had a higher accuracy and also the faster reaction time when the trial was matching their stereotype. So people who are stereotyped, it kind of makes sense logically too. People who have a stereotype actually had a better performance in general whenever it was matching their stereotype.
I think my question is on this point. So for people who are less biased, if you were to, for example, limit the time, for example, or like give them like a time limit, do you think that like the results would change in any way?
A very interesting question. I think so, but then maybe the other way around. So like the anecdote I can give is like this explicit task we had. This is actually like, it's not really, there's no, I mean, the implicit task didn't have a time pressure either, but then like the feeling is you should be pressing it. But then like this one is really like a survey question basically, so they could be taking like as long as they want to really explicitly choose a specific gender. And then there looks like some people are actually going for like a somewhat more politically correct answer, let's say. So like, yeah, when more time is given, people actually think about it. But then for the implicit association, I mean, they don't even know that we are actually asking about gender. So hopefully the task actually really just tapped onto like kind of like what you are, like kind of underlining association you're making without even not the saying. But yes, when given time, answer will change.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Do we have another question?
Just a quick curiosity question.
So you used a questionnaire for the, I think for identifying the individual types, right? In your experience, to what extent does the questionnaire actually reveal individual differences, right? This is a more general question about like what I think I do as opposed to what I do. So I was wondering if you have any comments.
So the only thing I can say is like this brain study I showed you earlier and I never explained, so maybe it's a good time to explain it. So basically this is a task where you can again decide on which way you want to do. Like either way you could actually, like you could rely on more of like a language the aspect, or you could actually just purely visually do the task. Because, yeah, it's gonna take too long probably to explain. Maybe I can do that afterwards. But the idea is there. So like it's just the behavioral task that they actually have to answer, and while doing so, they actually, I mean, their brain is being scanned. And what they found out was actually like this specific part usually we actually use to look into language, if you see more gyrus in this case, as actually like having like some, supramarginal gyrus is actually being activated, even though that they actually could have done the task just based on picture, looking like they're actually using language to solve this picture kind of matching task. Well, the other way around, like when you were just matching words, but you couldn't think of a visual. And these people who actually seems to be visualizing actually were having this specific brain activation too. So this activation wasn't correlated with the answer, the self-report they provided. So that being said, though, they of course, just because you had a brain activation and found the correlation between an activation and the self-report doesn't really mean it's like really trustworthy. Like there is definitely a problem with just using self-reports. And we're trying to actually, that's partially why we have at least many different questionnaires being used, trying to figure out what is more reliable and what is more meaningful in this context. But always like, yeah, it gets a bit difficult. I agree. Thank you.
Um, Thank you for the talk. It was very interesting. So I'm really curious about something. It might sound odd, but for the implicit gender association test, so there are differences between languages with classifiers, genders, and the ones that are not. So I was wondering if there is a study that differentiates people with synesthesia while assigning gender to inanimate items.
Ooh, very interesting question. I'm not sure like if everyone actually familiar with this idea of synesthesia. So like, I mean, this is a condition where that you actually make like this automatic association between different things that shouldn't be usually neurotypically associated with, meaning like the most commonly documented one being like you see like letters and numbers, and then you see the color automatically even when it's written in black. And there are other associations you could be making, but anyhow, and but why would you actually think that synesthetic individual would have a different?
So, for example, as a Turkish speaker myself, Turkish doesn't have any genders, but I mean, numbers do have genders for me.
You are synesthetic.
So maybe I thought maybe that could play a role in gender assignment.
I mean, like, I would imagine so. I mean, that is not really my field, but I have a very close friend that actually works a lot on this topic. So I might actually ask for it, but do I have any comments on it though? I mean, I would imagine so. I mean, from like, I did research on like sound symbolism, which is like sometimes related to, I mean, like some scholars believe there's some relation between these two phenomena. And then from that kind of direction, I would imagine that yes, because you are actually feeling it, that should actually affect your classification too. But I would love to hear about your personal experience afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kanero, for the amazing talk. We now have lunch break, and then we will have the first cluster session at 1:40. To Turkey. Okay, to Turkey. Also presenters might give you the preparations in the last 30 minutes of the lunch. See you all.